You're welcome to a fresh edition of your program Towards a Greater Nigeria. I still remain your anchor Omotaya Omotosho. A hearty congratulations to the government and people of Nigeria for us to have successfully hosted Habitat 3 Africa Regional Conference, which took place in Abuja, and it was held as a prelude towards a new urban agenda. We must say congratulations to the Supervisory Minister, Honorable Minister Power, Works and Housing, Minister Babatunde Fashola. I witnessed a lot of business tourists, not only from Africa, from the Caribbean, from America, from Asia, you name it. Nigeria was ready for them. And of course, they had a swell of a time. We'll bring you excerpts of this conference while you relax and savour yourself with this tidbit.
The United Nations has called the conference the third in a series that began in 1976 to reinvigorate the global political commitment to the sustainable development of towns, cities, and other human settlements, both rural and urban. The product of that reinvigoration, along with pledges and new obligations, is being referred to as the New Urban Agenda. That agenda will set a new global strategy around urbanization for the next 2 decades. The 3-day Habitat 3 Africa Regional Meeting, which normally holds after every 20 years, has successfully taken place in Abuja, Nigeria. Focusing on African priorities for a new urban agenda, that is, sustainable urban development, with a remarkable turnout from national governments, local authorities, civil society, international organizations, and other relevant stakeholders from the region and beyond. Because population growth and patterns of urbanization differ from one region to another, often with significant variations between nations and cities within each region, it becomes imperative that priorities and solutions are identified to fit regional contexts. For example, population growth in Africa is identified as one of the highest globally, with the continent's population projected to increase from approximately 1 billion today to approximately 2 billion by 2040. This notable growth in the total population in Africa will also translate into an increase in the rate of urbanization, with urban dwellers projected to increase from 40% in 2010, 400 million, to 50%, roughly 1 billion by 2035. The Minister of State for Power, Works and Housing, Honorable Mustapha Baba Shehuri, on behalf of the federal government of Nigeria, declared the technical segment opened and noted that the meeting is a milestone on the road to the 3rd United Nations Conference on Housing and Sustainable Urban Development, Habitat 3. The minister then enjoined all delegates from African region to articulate a common position while speaking with one strong voice towards the realization of sustainable urban development in the continent.
Without doubt, this meeting marks an important milestone on the road to the 3rd United Nations Conference on Housing and Sustainable Urban Development, Habitat 3. It is clearly visible that we have the most impressive array of very distinguished personalities who have come from far and near to join us at this all-important conference, which offers a rallying point for generating common African position. Urbanization is virtually on a rampage across the continent, and its attendant crushing consequences are so clear. There is debilitating urban poverty, and most of the emerging cities are not functional economically or otherwise.
Africa is urbanizing at a high pace, and cities are fast becoming the focus of majority of African people. But in spite of the challenge, Africa is making headways in creating an enabling environment for cities and local governments to be able to cope with the urban challenge. cities are the engine of economic growth and development. The vital role of urbanization for sustainable development is strongly reflected in Goal 2 of the Sustainable Development Agenda, which calls for making cities and human settlements safe, resilient, and sustainable. Agreeably, the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria, FMBN, observes that Habitat 3 Africa Abuja 2016 has provided an enabling platform in line with the bank's ongoing institutional initiatives and ideal action plans to invigorate the global commitment to sustainable urbanization, to focus on the implementation of the new urban agenda, as well as building on the Habitat Agenda of Istanbul in 1996. Mr. Richard Essin is the Acting Managing Director and Chief Executive, Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria, FMBN.
Okay, first and foremost, let me say that this is the first major continental event that is being hosted by the Honorable Minister of Power, Works and Housing. That the whole of Africa is here. To speak about habitats and urbanization.
Exactly.
Speaks a lot about the level of importance that the old minister attaches to urbanization, with particular emphasis on housing. Being our supervising minister, it's also good to capture his thoughts at events like this in terms of how we intend to execute our mandates in Federal Mortgage Bank.
Nigeria was creditably given the honor to host this meeting because it has supported 19 African countries over the past 20 years to develop their own plans on national urban policies. Mr. Mohammed Bello is the Minister, Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, Nigeria.
Therefore, we are happy that this conference is taking place here in Abuja, where, like I mentioned to you, we have witnessed astronomical growth in population, which naturally will require commensurate provision of adequate facilities and social services to be able to cater for the basic needs of all the citizens. I'm aware the aim of the Habitat 3 conference taking place later in the year in Quito, Ecuador, is to produce a new urban agenda for the 21st century, in which more than half of the world's population will live in cities and are expected to continue to grow.
The Habitat 3 Africa Regional Meeting featured an array of personalities from the African region, academia, civil societies, and heads of delegation from the United Nations Habitat Secretariat in New York and Nairobi. Other speakers at the event supported the drive by the United Nations to identify the need for continents of member countries to deliberate on their common challenges on urbanization in order to identify and reflect their various inputs, which will form the new urban agenda when the October Quito conference comes to a close. Habitat 3 and its intended outcomes have been requested by the UN General Assembly, the United Nations' most representative body. It is the nation states of the General Assembly also that defines the conference's parameters, scope, and intended results. Habitat 3 is thus a UN-wide initiative, and that is a very key distinction. Dr. Aisha Abdullahi is the Commissioner for Political Affairs, African Union Commission.
The first pillar of our Agenda 2063 envisions cities and other settlements as hubs of cultural and economic activities. Human settlements require modern infrastructure and the provision of basic services. If well managed, cities can propel our continent towards greater industrialization and a growing middle class. Harnessing the growth potential of our cities therefore requires strong local governments and institutions that are close to the people. It's in recognition of this urgency in correcting our urban development approach that the heads of state and government in our continent called for immediate concerted efforts way back in 2003, and I'm glad that the African ministers responsible for housing and urban development have since then maintained the momentum for realization of sustainable urban and human settlements development in Africa and the crafting of a truly African homegrown approach to unlocking the potential of our urban and human settlements.
Other dignitaries who spoke include the Minister of Land, Urbanism and Habitat of Chad, Mr. Mbogo Ngabo, and Minister of Urban Renewal and Living Conditions, Senegal, Mr. Diène Farba Sarr, under the topic, A New Urban Agenda, a Transformative Action Plan for Urbanization. Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Housing and Sustainable Urban Development, Habitat 3, Dr. Joan Close, said this was the first time in the history of development that urbanization is being considered as a tool for development and engine for growth. According to him, what is being witnessed through the initiative was a paradigm shift which identifies urbanization as a solution to many of the challenges facing the world today. He said the new urban agenda can be an essential part of solutions to inefficient transport, pollution, unemployment and social exclusion, adding that the new urban agenda mentioned a few-pronged approach that takes into consideration key elements.
Those are, number one, first, a national urban policy. The numbers two, the second is the revision and adaptation of the urban rules and regulations. The third is the design of proper urban settings and urban fabrics. The fourth is the financial design for urbanization. And the fifth, finally, and especially with a very important factor to be contributed by local authorities and local governments, is the elaboration of planned city extensions and planned city infills. This set of ideas, this set of strategies can embrace in a universal manner all the risks, all the challenges and all the opportunities that urbanization faces worldwide. Worldwide, we are expecting and doubling the urbanization of planet Earth, coming from the current 3.5 million people urbanized to probably reaching something like 7 billion people urbanized in the 50s and 60s of this century.
The chair of the African Regional Conference and Nigeria's Minister of Power, Works and Housing, Mr. Babatunde Raji Fashola, SAN, urged African ministers of housing and urban development and other stakeholders to utilize the continent's commonality of purpose to define the unique peculiarities of human settlements development challenges and infuse same in the new urban agenda fashioned for the world in Habitat 3. The minister further expressed optimism that the regional conference would produce far-reaching policy recommendations and clear-cut set of declarations that would enrich the new agenda and bring visible profit to Africa. The minister observed that the conference, with the theme Africa's Priorities for the New Urban Agenda, is expected to chart a clear path towards a sustainable urban future for Africa and Africans, adding that for all our cities to be places of opportunity and prosperity, to be crucibles for change, we need to chart the first course for ourselves. The minister observed that no city can grow properly without robust infrastructure solutions such as good roads, bridges, affordable housing and decent schools. Also, constant electricity, clean water and clever town planning, adding that the utilization of infrastructure was critical to deal with the realities of decades of urbanization and its challenges.
One consideration that I will very strongly urge upon this gathering, if we must deal with urbanization decisively and sustainably, is a resolution to slow it down. But it is not a slowdown by proclamation. It is a slowdown by sensible choices that creates opportunities where there once was desperation. There are universal minimum standards for things like road traffic, healthcare, and so on and so forth. And we should embrace those minimum standards. But clearly, there are no maximum standards. And therefore, Africa can reach for as much of those universally accepted standards as we choose. And I think that Africa must reach for the best that the world has to offer. Our president has left no one in doubt about this government's commitment to agriculture, not only to diversify our economy, but to take the real economy to those who have struggled on the margins of our society and therefore headed for the urban centers. One of the key solutions to creating sustainable cities and urban areas is that we need to see agriculture differently from the way that we have approached it. We need to see it as a tool for sustainable urbanization, essentials for cities and for towns to evolve properly. After all, it is the people in the rural area that will produce the food that people in the city will eat. Rural areas therefore need to be supported. Our farmers need to be encouraged and supported to stay and grow food, employ local people, and provide food security for all. The best investment in public schools, including public health, education, and infrastructure, has traditionally been around the cities and in the big towns. Can we have a rethink about this? Can we swing this around? And I would like to also lend my support to the call for international support, not only for our initiatives, but also for the Human Habitat Secretariat in terms of technical support, so that all of the African states and all of the participating states who need help can leverage on that technical support. And I would urge that this is something that should be on the front burner for consideration as our heads of government meet in Kigali later in the year.
The Abuja Declaration is expected to be a vital official contribution to the Habitat 3 preparative process. Due to the significance of the African continent in terms of development and because of its growing role in the global economy. It said the African continent would mobilize financial resources to enhance multi-stakeholder engagement for the effective implementation of the new urban agenda for cities and human settlements in Africa. It would also enhance capacity building, skills, and technology transfer for sustainable urban and human settlements planning and management. All these and more are contained in the keynote address delivered by Mr. Muhammadu Buhari, President, Federal Republic of Nigeria, ably represented by no other personality than Professor Yemi Osinbajo, SAN, GCON, Vice President, Federal Republic of Nigeria.
The organization that we desire in Africa should accordingly take place in a manner that simultaneously promotes growth and social inclusion. However, despite having the fastest rate of urbanization in the world at over 4.5% a year, Africa is yet to be on a sustainable path to achieving these twin objectives. Indeed, 60 years or more after independence, cities and human settlements of all sizes and functions have bloomed all over Africa, most with significant challenges as has been pointed out already. This situation poses a unique set of challenges and opportunities requiring practical and well thought out solutions. Some of the challenges identified relate to poor policy gaps and budgetary inadequacies, poor planning of urban areas in our continent, and they are attributed to limited capacity, insufficient resources, and outdated data.
Mini exhibition of enticing modern urban development structures and equipment were displayed to capture the attention of the conference participants.
Nigeria is hosting a mega international conference, the Habitat 3 Africa Regionals meeting, and we're so excited. How do you feel as a representative of Mr. President?
Well, I think the issues are huge. I mean, I'm not so sure about excitement. I think that the issues that we have to contend with are huge. But it's very good to know that this is a preparatory meeting for the conference in Quito, which is coming up shortly, and that Africa is taking a common position. That's very, very important to us, that we're not going in there disorganized or disunited, and that we're taking a common position on those issues that affect us as a continent. So that's very, very heartwarming.
As Mr. Fashola advised, the era of talk should be discouraged. A more action approach should be considered instead. The minister responds.
I think the time to stop talking is now. The time to start doing is now. What is different in this conference is that for the first time, as far as urbanization is concerned, Africans are taking control of their own agenda, which is different from what used to be in Habitat 1 and Habitat 2. And so this is our agenda, and that agenda was concluded at a meeting of ministers yesterday. And you will see the content of that agenda in the final communique. In the statements of the ministers that we all received today, there was a unanimous support for that agenda, and therefore it's the difference this time is that we're taking control, and we'll be pushing this agenda on to the heads of states at their meeting in Kigali. And what you'll be seeing is a new consciousness, not only about the challenges that are inherent in urbanization, but also the enormous opportunities that lie in it for economic development, for inclusion, for growth, for gender protection and sensitivity, and for safety.
Most of the times we see in Abuja, Lagos, capital cities make decisions on behalf of almost 60 or 70% of the population that are in the rural areas. Habitat is saying, well, we want development. We want to build skyscrapers, etc. But we should also consider taking along, carrying the rural people and developing alongside with the big cities we are building.
We're also hoping to use housing to diversify the Nigerian economy. We're looking at the numbers, the very interesting numbers, the number of doors that we will need, the number of ceramic that we will need, tiles, fittings, the number of timber for rafters, for roofing, and how that can support small and medium enterprises, and how we can use that also to expand the economy. So all of that is coming.
On the official opening day, 2 high-level panel sessions were held. The Imperative for Urbanization in Africa, the New Urban Agenda, and Urbanization and Human Settlements, Institutions, Policies and Practical Measures in the Implementation of the Agenda 2063. All these and more activities featured in the Habitat 3 Africa Regional Meeting between 24th to 26th February 2016 will be touched in the subsequent editions of this series.
Well, viewers, this is where we call it a day on your program Towards a Greater Nigeria. We still have a lot to show you on the just concluded Habitat 3 Africa Regional Conference, but time will not permit us. Make sure you don't miss this program as we give you a continuation, same time, same station next week. Thanks for joining us. I remain your uncle, Omotayo Motasho. Good night.